Time for part 2 of my running series now on great films of the 1990s. I started this series because I can kind of come off as a hater of 90s cinema sometimes, and it's not because I dislike 90s cinema, it's because I dislike the 90s cinema that we're having nostalgia for. So I could have called this 10 years of films that are better than Event Horizon, but I didn't do that. This is basically me going through each year of the 90s, giving you 10 recommendations for films that I think are great. It's not a ranked list, it's just a list. I'm not ranking. I'm just going to give you 10 films that I think are amazing, that I would prefer to be talking about rather than Event Horizon. So Backdraft is a Ron Howard film. It stars Kurt Russell and Robert De Niro, William Baldwin. It's a salt-of-the-earth kind of film, drama, family story, but it's also centered around an arsonist that's creating these particular kinds of fires that they call backdrafts. And we've got two brothers, Kurt Russell and William Baldwin, who are kind of competitive in life and trying to figure their way out with their family, all the while playing on different sides of investigating these fires because they're both in the fire department. It's a great drama. It's beautifully shot. The sequences of the fire are stunning and nail-biting at times. Really highly recommend this one if you haven't seen it. 35 Up is a Michael Apted film. It's part of his running series called the Up series. It's a documentary. Of course, being a documentary filmmaker, I'm going to recommend documentaries from time to time. This started with the 7 Up film, and in that film, he had a group of kids, 7-year-old kids, that he sat down and talked to about their family life and their aspirations and goals for their future as adults and that kind of thing. And he would go back every 7 years and do a new documentary. And this is the same group of kids at 35, and it's so fascinating to look at where they are in their lives at 35 and compare and contrast that with what they thought their lives would be like when they were 7. It's a very good film. It's a very good series of films. It goes all the way up into their 40s. I highly recommend. I do have a heart. I do appreciate romance. I do appreciate comedy. Contrary to popular belief, this is an Albert Brooks film called Defending Your Life. He wrote it, directed it, stars in it, along with Meryl Streep. Basically tells the story of a man who's living a questionable life. We don't know if he's a good person or a bad person. But when he dies, he's put into a neutral zone, kinda, where he is to be judged. And depending on the outcome of that judging, he may go to heaven or he may go somewhere else. And while he's there waiting to be judged, he meets another person who's in the same boat, played by Meryl Streep. And they start to spark a relationship and go through the trials and tribulations of this situation together. It's very funny. It's sweet. They have great chemistry. It's a beautiful movie, and it's bitingly funny in a way that only Albert Brooks can do. Highly recommend this one. It's on Criterion. You should pick it up. I am an unabashed Star Trek fan. I love Star Trek, and this particular movie, The Undiscovered Country, does Star Trek and science fiction in the best possible way. It takes a different genre, a different kind of storytelling, and wraps it in the sci-fi blanket. Here we have a mystery. It's a political mystery with all the intrigue, espionage, and stuff that goes along with that genre of film, but it's set in space in the world of Star Trek. It's a very, very fun film. It's got a really great characters that you know and love from the original TV series. Even if you're not a Trek fan, this one isn't full of all the techno-babble that's present in some Star Trek TV shows. This is more about character, more about mystery, and more about political intrigue. I love this one. It really might be the best in the franchise. It's weird that Cape Fear isn't talked about more in Martin Scorsese's filmography. It's a fantastic remake of a classic film from 1962, and it features Nick Nolte, Jessica Lange, Juliette Lewis, and of course Robert De Niro. It tells the story of an attorney who plays some funky games with evidence to keep a violent sex offender in prison, played by Robert De Niro. Well, he spends 14 years plotting his revenge, and when he does get out, he seeks to take that revenge, and Nick Nolte has to do some pretty extreme things to protect his family. This thing is definitely a noir film, as the original was. Scorsese really riffs on that genre. It's thrilling, it's suspenseful, and it's beautifully acted by this incredible cast. If you haven't seen this remake of Cape Fear, I highly recommend it. It's one of the few times where I really think the remake is better than the original. Is that a hot take? Boys in the Hood has to be one of the best versions of the urban experience that's ever been put to film. It has a stellar cast led by Cuba Gooding Jr. and Ice Cube. It also has Morris Chestnut. Angela Bassett is here. It's directed by John Singleton, and it really tells the story of a young man, a very brilliant young man who's fighting to scrape ahead, to get out of his circumstance, out of the racism and classism that has been foisted upon him. Lawrence Fishburne is not the best role model, even though he's trying really hard. It's really complicated. A lot of this falls into a gray area. You've got good-hearted people who maybe do bad things, and obviously just bad people too. But it's a beautifully told drama. If you haven't seen Boys in the Hood, you really should. This is peak cinema from the 90s. Thelma and Louise is a Ridley Scott film that tells the story of two women who find themselves in desperate straits in their family life, their home life, and decide that the only thing they can do is make a run for the border, literally, a run to Mexico. And it's Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon. Brad Pitt is also in here in a small role. You got Harvey Keitel. This is one of Ridley Scott's smaller dramas. He'll do an epic science fiction thing, and then he'll come back around and do a small character-based drama, and that's what this is. They go through a lot on their road trip, and the ending of this film is epic. It features music by Glenn Frey from the Eagles. It's beautifully shot and also, wonderfully acted. So you've got to see this one if you haven't. It's on Criterion now, so we've got no excuses. JFK might be Oliver Stone's best film, and it really does sort of play into some conspiracy theory and that kind of thing on the death of President Kennedy, but it's still a fascinating watch. Kevin Costner plays the investigator behind the process of investigating the assassination. After the killer, played by Gary Oldman, is killed himself, the case gets closed, but then Costner's character reopens the case and starts to follow a different thread, and he's met by all kinds of resistance through the government and other places. It's just a well-done drama, even if you don't necessarily buy into the story that it's being told. It's an incredible cast. Obviously, you've got Costner and Oldham, you've got Donald Sutherland, Kevin Bacon. John Candy, of all people, is in this one. Tommy Lee Jones and Sissy Spacek are here. It just keeps going and going. This thing really looks of the era. Now, it does have that 90s sheen across it and that Oliver Stone style on it, but it really does a great job of painting a portrait of the time in which all this happened. How are we going to talk about 1991 and not talk about Terminator 2? You've got Linda Hamilton, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Edward Furlong continuing the battle against Skynet, except this time our villain from Terminator has returned in hero form. This is action-packed. It had groundbreaking special effects at the time, and groundbreaking storytelling style, too. It's a road picture. It's an action movie. It's a drama. Everything is here. This is peak James Cameron. I know he's done a lot of great films since, but this is probably the film he's going to be remembered for real. And finally, we've got Silence of the Lambs. How can we miss Silence of the Lambs? This Jonathan Demme-directed classic stars Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins. It also has Ted Levine and some other really great character actors rounding out the ensemble cast. This film is terrifying. It's a drama. It's a horror film for real, at least in the last act. The level of suspense in this movie, the first time I saw this, had me literally clenched up in a ball. I love Jodie Foster, and this is the film that really made me discover her. Of course, she was in other movies before this, some really great classics, but this film was the Jodie Foster we all know and love now. I can't say too much about this except why have you not watched it if you haven't watched it? If you have, then you love it like I do. This is literally one of the top 2 or 3 best films of the entire decade. All right, that's 1991. Let me know in the comments what your favorite films from 1991 are. And like and follow if you want to see more. I'm going to do the entire decade. So stick with me. Let's do this.